Welcome to Tough Talk. I'm your host, Paul Taros, and today my guest is Bill Nalu, who is president of Interstate Auto Care in Madison Heights, Michigan. He is a product of Oak Park High School and Wayne State University and has over 30 years in the automotive service and retail industry. He currently serves on several industry advisory boards. He chairs the Oakland Technical School's Transportation Advisory Council, and his mission is to help lift the skilled trades to a level of respectability on par with traditional formal education. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for having me.
So, how did you get started in the auto industry?
Well, I'll give you the Cliff's Notes version of that. It started sort of on the cusp of my 16th birthday. I was fortunate enough. It didn't seem like a fortunate day that day, but I was fortunate enough to have a father let me buy that quintessential piece of junk off of a used car lot. And it broke down that night, 2 miles from my home. And as a result of that, fast forward, I had to take auto mechanics in high school. Back then, we had automotive mechanics. We had metal shop. We had wood shop in high school. And so, God, what blessed days those were. The amount of skills that were garnered during those formidable years. I'm here. I'm here, a product of that education, having earned a college education, paid my way through college from the skills that we developed back in high school. And so so to piggyback on sort of what you were reading there is I think we have a marketing problem. I think this isn't a technical problem, it's a marketing problem. And I think it requires a marketer to get out into industry and to these young people and inspire them, to remind them that a traditional education doesn't have to be for everybody. And I guess to clarify, I'm not here to criticize millennials, as we'll discuss here in a minute, and I'm not here to criticize academia. I'm a product. I'm a college-educated person, and I have nothing but good memories from my college education. My issue is it doesn't necessarily have to be for everybody. And I think the more we recognize that, the sooner we can get to solving this problem. This didn't just happen today. This is a problem that's been going on for decades now. And it really, really is coming to a head here. In my world, in my little world, the transportation sector, which is only the third largest contributor of GDP in our economy, we've got a huge problem. A technician, a skilled technician, is harder to find than probably a doctor these days. And so it's just getting worse and worse at this point. And so we're in a position now to where we're going to have to sort of grow our own. It's not enough to just sort of wait on high schools and trade schools to start pumping folks out. We're now in a desperate position to start training folks from within, and then meanwhile teaching them how to add value to it is that you do. We have a lot of, I think one of the biggest contributors to this problem is frankly that the technician, the butcher, baker, candlestick maker, was put in a position to sort of run their own business. There's a piece of work called The E-Myth by Michael Gerber. It's one of the most important pieces of literature on business. And he talks about how 80% of small business, 80% of small business owners fail in the first 5 years. If you're lucky enough to get past that first 5 years, 80% of the remaining 20% fail in the next 5 years. So if you're doing the math on that, it's like 96% failure rate. What is it that we're missing here as technicians, as that butcher, baker, candlestick maker, that if we understood would allow us to get past this point? And what that is perhaps a formal education, a formal business education, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a 4-year degree, but a formal education around a technical background. And so what I tell my kids, both of my kids are products of that, is have a skill that you can do with your hands, but also get a formal degree in business so that you can commoditize that, so that you can translate that value to the consumer base.
Okay. What are skilled trades?
So skilled trades are your plumbers, your electricians, pipe fitters, automotive technicians, and this is just a small representation of it's a huge industry. But basically, if you're as Micro, I don't know if you're familiar with Micro, Dirty Jobs, of Dirty Jobs fame. So Micro has a TV show on Discovery Channel, and he often laments that if you're addicted to smooth roads and indoor plumbing, then you're going to have to come to the realization is that these people are pretty important in your life. If you have a hot water heater break in your home, and see how important that plumber is to your wife at 2 o'clock in the morning when you need to have him come out, or him or her for that matter, right?
Right.
These are when you can fix things with your hands. It's incredible. I mean, one of the things that my son is a product of Boy Scouts. He's an Eagle Scout, I'm proud to say.
Wow, that's very impressive.
And so one of the things that I'm able to say to these young men is that it's one thing to be the jock in high school, okay? But if you fast forward, you'll find that the folks that have actually become successful in life are the young men and women who were able to work with their hands. I mean, look at all of the things that we do now. My wife, the things that she appreciates most about me is that if the garage door breaks or the ventilation, anything in the house that needs fixing, she knows I'm just around the corner. And so there's value in being able to work with your hands. And there's a dignity in being able to fix, being able to bring something to life. I can't tell you how many things I've broken over the years trying to learn how to fix things. But I think, so one of the things that I think we need to do more of is to celebrate failing forward. John Maxwell, a famous motivational speaker, has a book called Failing Forward. And that is that we don't give failure the proper context that it deserves. We live in a world nowadays where it's better safe than sorry. And what that amounts to is you take all of anything sharp, any saws, anything that might hurt a student, and you take that out of the school for fear of the school system being sued for somebody getting hurt. And that's a tragedy, because better safe than sorry makes you safe and sorry. There's no, I don't know how you grow as a student or you grow as a human being without getting cuts on you. I've had hundreds and hundreds of cuts on my hands, and I wouldn't trade any of them for the lessons that I've learned along the way. They've saved fingers. Those cuts have saved fingers. And that's not just, that's real. That's tough talk right there.
Well, these skilled trades are jobs that can't be exported overseas to, India or the Philippines because the people have to be here to do the work.
Yeah.
So it's a very safe career, really.
Absolutely. The other part of this is, in my little world, the convergence of technology. I mean, you take your average smartphone with all the technology that it has in it. That smartphone is now what we call the center stack in today's most modern vehicle. The Tesla Model X has essentially a giant iPad in the middle of that dashboard. And everything is going to be through that. And at some point in time, it's going to be voice to text. You want to turn up the volume, you want to do whatever. It might be intuitive at some point in time. There may be a sensor wired into your ear or something that might be able to tell it what the temperature of the vehicle is or whatever the heck might be. So this convergence of technology, the mechanical aspects of it, the chemistry, the physics, the electronics, the electrical behind this is all converging. And oh, by the way, we're going to ask this vehicle to take us from one place to another without us ever having touched the steering wheel, if the steering wheel is going to exist. Where are we going to find these young people to design the next generation of smart vehicles, let alone service them? And so I'm here to basically say, if you're a small business owner, if you're in this transportation sector, get involved. We can't wait for academia to get it by themselves. We have to get involved, really, really intimately involved in what they're doing. If there's any criticism at all in what's going on in that rank, is that if you're an automotive instructor, for example, if you've been out of that vocation for about 10 years and now you're strictly teaching, there's a huge gap that has occurred in terms of technology. And the other part of that is that while they're trying to just teach these students soft skills, what they're missing out on is the business opportunity of that. And I'll just give you a quick example. So one of the things that I've often wondered is, at OTEC, it's a nonprofit. So when they're servicing, let's say, a teacher's vehicle, you can't make any money doing that. And so what ends up happening is you don't get the pressure on being able to sell the service at a going rate. And when I mean going rate, I mean just something nominal, just something to put a little bit of skin in the game. So what I would want is I would want the curriculum to add to that. The ability of someone to contact the consumer, the client, and say this is what it's going to cost and why this is going to cost. Have the client say, well, why does it cost this much? And they'd be able to answer to that. And so those are the soft skills that allow a student that might have been in an automotive technology background to all of a sudden become a salesperson. And where did they learn those sales skills? In that environment. Who cares whether you're selling, oil changes or whether you're selling clothing? It's the same soft skill that we're teaching here. And so that's sort of the kind of invitation that I call us to, and that is to bring a little bit more of a rounded education to these technical to the technical curriculums.
Okay. Do you think there's a stigma associated with entering the skilled trade field?
Absolutely. We talked about this before. I'm an immigrant, Middle Eastern heritage, and one of the things that my parents drilled into us, and it's not an anomaly. I think just about every immigrant class that comes here, the parents work themselves to the bone, and all they want is they want their children to have an education. But by that they mean, doctor, lawyer, accountant, some job that isn't going to get any dirt under your fingernails. Mm-hmm. And I think we're cheating that generation from that. I think the young people, I have a huge fondness for the generation that came before me. I have a lot of respect for the dignity of being able to get up at the end of in the morning, the day after, to have a sore back, to have some bruises on your hand, to say, you know what, we got some work done yesterday. My son and I, just recently, back in the summertime, we sort of rebuilt our wood deck, and the work that was done was learned in middle school. I learned that in middle school. Sad to say, we don't have that in high school anymore. What is that all about? What are we afraid of here? Why are we afraid of pulling these kids into? It worked for us. It worked wonders for my work ethic, and I'm sure your work ethic here. And we wonder why millennials don't want to, so they want to give up too soon. Well, they live in a generation where you sort of in the dating world, they date left to reject, right to accept. Same thing with the jobs, and so. I think it's incumbent on our generation to say to them, there's a little bit of it's a little bit of stick-to-itiveness that you have to have. You can't just give up on something. And I think if we approach it that way, if we inspire them and show them sort of how we became who we became, that this is an app you pull up and learn from. This isn't a YouTube channel. This is life happening. And it took 20, 30 years for us to get to where we are, that there's a little bit of patience involved, but not too much patience. Too much patience, causes procrastination, and then we wonder what happened here. What happened with 30 years of nothing?
Is there a shortage of skilled trade instructors?
Well, sure, yeah. The instructor, there's the shortage is part and parcel by the fact that we don't have enough folks going in. I mean, just you look at the transportation sector. The stigma around that is that it's alternative education. That you'll find that some of the kids that are in that curriculum just couldn't make it in the STEM classes, right? Science, technology, engineering, math. They didn't have the aptitude for it, or so we thought, because they were bored. right? Come to find out, this young person has the aptitude, they weren't inspired. And again, it's not a blame game. This isn't about blaming the teacher that couldn't pull this out. This is our responsibility. When we say millennials, the stigma around millennials is that they're lazy and they don't want to put forth the effort, right? Who brought these millennials into this world? Who's when we have a factory that doesn't work, the American mentality back in the day, in the 70s, we would blame the worker, that lazy worker, right? The Japanese came along and said, well, no, we blame management. This is a management problem. If you instill accountability and instill responsibility, if you give them some things, if you give them a piece of this, running this show, if you give them something to be involved in, if you give them some autonomy, you'll find that they grow into themselves and they become part owners of this organization. And so same with that, is I would like to see these millennials, these young people be involved in the advisory committee. I want them to be at the table so that they can say, nope, this isn't, you're not inspiring me. This doesn't sound like this is going to work for me. That's sort of where I think we need to be headed.
Okay. Who should consider skilled trades?
I think we can, right now we test for aptitude, right, for math and science, and we know what kids are going to be able to handle AP courses. We see these young people come in that have a need to tinker. And I think as early as maybe elementary school, I think there has to be, I'm not an expert on the subject matter, but there has to be some way to determine whether a child has an affinity, a love for wanting to build things. Is it the kid that's playing with Lincoln logs? I don't know. I can tell you that for me, every time I saw a toaster or a TV set that was working, I needed to find out what was inside. I had to find out what was inside. And broke a lot of things along the way. Not ashamed to say. But we have to be able to do that. We have to be. One of the things that I remember the biggest lesson that we had in automotive technology back in, this was like 1981 to 83 is when I graduated in 1983. But one of the biggest things that one of the most exciting things was we had a few salvaged vehicles that were donated. I might have been a teacher's vehicle or what have you, but it was, the vehicle was salvaged. And we ended up basically taking it apart. Like every nut and bolt came apart on this vehicle. And what we learned was sort of how things went together. It's an amazing thing to see, even to see in a smartphone, to say, how in the world, I don't see any nuts and bolts on this thing. How does something like that go together? And to see that come apart, and to see why every square inch of real estate on that phone or on that car has a specific purpose. And if not, let's ask why. Why do you put it here instead of here? To go through that it was an incredible exercise in technology, how it all comes together, what engineering is.
I remember I had a class where we had to take apart an engine and put it back together and make sure it had a start.
Yeah.
And if you put it back together and it didn't start, you didn't pass. But and that was without any of the electronics today.
Yeah. It's still a high bar to pass, to have an engine, to be able to pull an engine apart, put it back together again. Again, it's one of those things we weren't afraid. Nowadays it would be like, okay, you got to have, you've got to have many more safety-related devices around before we'd even think about doing something like that. And that's sort of we have to be willing to say to parents that send their kids to these skilled trades that byproduct of this is your son or your daughter might come home and they're going to have some cuts and bruises and dirty hands. We can mitigate some of that stuff, with safety training, but at some point in time we have to be willing to say that there's some risk involved. in this. We have to be able to entice this next generation to say that there is no free lunch. You have to put in the sweat equity if you're going to be able, before we can have you work on this latest generation automotive vehicle, we have to get you to learn some of the basics. And bridging that gap, I think, is the biggest challenge, because what they want to do is they don't want to work on that brake caliper. They don't want to work on that carbureted, lawnmower. They want to work on that Tesla. And the challenge is going to be inspiring them, and I think it's going to require a whole new level of commitment from industry partners like myself and from this next generation of teachers that's going to come along. And I think there's a lot more philosophy and marketing involved than just technical training.
Okay. What are some of the benefits of trade schools?
Well, besides the fact that you can pay your way through college, you can. There's $100,000 in many cases you have companies that will actually hire you and train you at the same time. I don't know how many. Are there, in your case, you're a CPA. Are there colleges that are willing to hire on a CPA trainee and bring them through and pay for their college tuition?
Geez. I don't know if there's that, but maybe if you've graduated from with the degree, it used to be, before you could be certified as a CPA, you used to have to work 2 years at a CPA firm.
Yeah.
And really you were getting a lot of on-the-job training.
Yeah.
In fact, I thought I learned more in those 2 years than I did at the 4 years in college.
Yeah.
They have since changed it to tack on a year to schooling, so now it's 5 years in school,
Yeah.
1 year, hands-on work experience.
Yeah.
I was totally against it because I knew I learned so much more on the job.
On the job, yeah. And that's what I'm getting at is the apprenticeship program, for whatever reason, is underutilized. So one of the examples I would get, one of the things that I get when I speak to other business owners in my world, and that is that you train this technician. You bring them along, and then somebody comes along and sort of whisks them away for more money or for greener pastures, and so we're sort of trading technicians. In any given market, you're sort of training. These guys have sort of bounced around, and there's a reason why technicians bouncing around, because they're probably not a keeper in the first place. That's probably not going to be the person who is going to be what we would consider to be an A tech, the person who's going to be your shop foreman, who's going to train younger people, and so. One of the problems with that is that we don't have any way to there's no bind there other than the fact that there's sort of a handshake. So one of the ideas, and this sort of came from a business coach that is predominantly handles a lot of stuff in Canada. In Canada, they do things a little bit differently. They have a training bond. And so what would happen, Paul, is you would come in, you're 18 years old, fresh out of high school. We would have a contract, and that contract would basically say is we're going to pay for your schooling. We're going to pay $50,000 over the next 2 years to have you graduate from this. And so the contract might be, let's say you're going to work for us for 5 years. It's a 5-year contract. And if you decide to bounce off of this contract, let's say in year 2 or year 3, the remainder portion of that academic cost would be, you would be paying for it. And so that is a creative way of sort of having an employer say you're worth investing in, and having an employee say, well, okay, I appreciate that, and I'm willing to give you, for the next 5 years, I'm willing to. And I think we do that in the Army. We do that in the military. You get the college, free college, for serving, and what a wonderful partnership that has been over the years. So.
Okay. And one of the things with going to college is you might graduate with a degree in history, but are you going to find a job utilizing that?
There was a very sad story a few months back There was a PhD in, I think it might have been Asian art history or something like that it was. He was living on the streets. And it wasn't because he has, some physical ailment or some mental problem that kept him from, he couldn't find a job to be able to pay for the $100,000-something of college tuition. That to me is unconscionable. To ask a young person to invest in their future, and at the end of this thing, to say, oh, by the way, I know this is sort of what we talked about 4 years ago in the counseling office, but we got nothing for you here. And this didn't happen, 4 years ago we knew that there wasn't going to be enough positions for history majors. Nothing, I love history, by the way, nothing against history.
Very important.
It's very important, but there's a need in specific places in industry. And there just isn't one for history or the arts. There, for better or for worse, there are more people addicted to smooth roads and to indoor plumbing than there are to appreciating a beautiful piece of work from a master from 400, 500 years ago. It just, clearly, there's no question about the fact that in everyday life, we have a need for people who can fix things. And I think it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to pass on to what speaks more to the American spirit than that do-it-yourselfness, to be able to do it yourself. How cool is that, right? The YouTube, which is arguably the most visited website on the planet, in the universe, is about helping people to, by and large, you got folks showing somebody how to lay tile and how to fix that plumbing leak, that roof, or what have you. What a wonderful resource that is. We talk about the internet, how it's so bad for, but look at all the wonderful things that you're able to accomplish when you can inspire somebody to sort of do it themselves. And that to me is what speaks to the skilled trade. That ability to be able to bring something to life. I don't compare it to certainly when you're in the medical profession, you've got people's lives you've got an infinite life in your hands, much, much more important. But bringing a car to life, taking two cars, making one out of them, and I've done my share of that, paid plenty of semesters, taking a $50 car, buying a $50 car and turning it into a $1,500 car, driving it for a semester. God, I have such a fondness for those days. Those were wonderful times.
Well, and it's...
and they still exist. They still exist.
And it's a great skill to be able to do something like that, I'll tell you. So we have about 30 seconds left, so is there anything you'd like to say about the skilled trades?
I guess just to reiterate what I was saying earlier, and that is that to invite other business owners. You'd be surprised how important your testimony is as a professional in industry, in whatever industry you're in. Contact your local high school, offer to speak to students. And you'll find yourself sort of where I found myself at, and that is that I sort of invited myself into a couple of classrooms. And what I saw was these young people really, it's one thing for a teacher to tell them how important it is, to study and to pay attention to what you're doing. But it's another thing when you have when you have a industry professional come along and sort of bridge that gap and say what your teacher is telling you is the absolute truth. Yeah, you need to pay attention to what's going on, not for her sake or for the sake of the quiet time in the classroom, but what you put into this thing is what you're going to get out. And if you don't put anything into it, don't expect anything to come out of it. And that's sort of where I would leave it at.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for joining me today.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Bill.
Pleasure.